Welcome back, everybody. We are back talking more about Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. And in today's video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the society that Huxley has created for his world and how it might reflect the world in which he lived and some of the concerns that were happening in the 1930s when he wrote this book. Because that's the thing about science fiction, speculative fiction in general, is that speculative fiction is never really about the future, right? It's not predicting what the future is going to be. It's not trying to tell us what to expect. Speculative fiction is always about the time in which it is written, and it is an author taking the concerns of their time and sort of stretching them out and saying, okay, how bad could this get? And using that for us as kind of a warning of what maybe not to do. So if we look at the 1930s, when Huxley was writing this was a troubling time. The early 20th century, honestly, was a lot. We got the World War I, we've got the Great Depression in the 20s. In the early and mid-30s, we have the rise of fascism in Europe. We also have great technological advancement. There's a good reason why the people of Huxley's world worship Henry Ford as kind of their messiah, their well, let's say it, God. They have reset the dates to be after Ford, right? Several hundred years after Ford. They have taken sort of like the cross, the Christian cross, snapped off the top, and you have a big T, which I have to assume would be like a Model T kind of thing. And the whole world in which they live is kind of based on specialization. We see when people are gestated, they are gestated in great big assembly lines, where one worker will do a specific thing for each fetus that comes by. And this great big assembly lines just keep going for 9 months as the kids are born. This is, of course, a reference to Ford's automaking revolution, right? Where he kind of pioneered the idea of the assembly line construction to make things faster and easier for his cars so more people could buy them. And so there's that kind of advancement. There's lots of advancements in communications and other technologies, weapons technologies, certainly. Advancements in travel. It's easier to travel from long distances than it was before. The science really seems to be ramping up, and there's even in less maybe sort of practical sciences, the astronomy and physics and biology and chemistry, there's new materials being produced. There's new understandings of the world that are coming out. The early 20th century, technologically, scientifically speaking, was quite exciting, really. And we see here Huxley kind of casting a little bit of an eye on that, going, hold on, is progress always better? Right? Is progress always better? I think that's maybe one of those core ideas of the book, or one of the core questions the book is asking ourselves. Is progress always better? And so he kind of sat down. I don't know how he did it because I wasn't there, but he sat down and he thought, okay, how could we extrapolate the world we're in to something that is maybe truly awful? And so he came up with the foundation of his Brave New World is this programmed assembly line birth gestation process. It is the removal of bonds of the mother and father in the family. It is where every human being who is born is conditioned to a specific role, right? So the alphas and the betas are individuals. They're allowed to gestate as individuals, and they do sort of the smarter work, right? The alphas, of course, are kind of the leaders, the highest ranking. The betas do whatever other work is necessary that requires individual thought and creativity. Down below them, we get the gammas, zetas, and epsilons. And they are basically clones. There's a whole interesting thing in there about the balkanization process, where a fertilized egg is deprived of heat or nutrients, and for some reason it just begins to bud and create new fetuses, new embryos, up to a certain point. So you make a whole batch of like identical clones from one egg. And they are set to do basically manual labor. And the gammas are the smartest of the group. The epsilons are the least smart of the group. And there are toxins. There's alcohol introduced into their bloodstream. There are things that are done deliberately to these people to make them less intelligent and less capable so that they only have the intelligence they need to do the job that they're being sort of given to do. And that is kind of terrifying in a lot of ways, especially when we sort of read it today and we know that things like genetic engineering are definitely things that are possible. One movie that I really like that kind of plays on this is Gattaca. If you watch that, ages ago, a couple of decades ago maybe, But same idea, right? People are programmed. People are designed from birth to be what their parents want them to be. And if you are not designed properly from before you are born, then certain things are excluded from you. The difference, of course, with Gattaca is that even if you were not designed from birth, if you were a love baby, you could still want to be better. And that's kind of the whole thrust of the book. Brave New World, Huxley adds, including this sort of assembly line birth process, he adds constant, rigorous sleep training, where when you sleep, little messages are piped into your ears about the kind of values that the world wants you to have, right? Everyone works for everyone else. We can't do this without everyone. Throughout the whole book, people kind of repeat these aphorisms as sort of mottos to themselves to remind themselves of what their values are. And so through that method, you are trained from birth to not want things that you can't have, to appreciate the position that you're in, even if you are an epsilon doing the worst of the worst work. So to me, that tells me that Huxley is looking at a world where the human individual is being lost, where a world where technology gets itself to a point where we dehumanize ourselves. And I think that's important, right? Is that this is, and we learned from the big speech from Mustafa Mond at the end, this is a decision that people made. This wasn't something that just sort of happened. This wasn't alien invaders imposing something on us. This was a decision that a group of people made, and everyone now is cool with it because, of course, they are. They were trained to be cool with it. And I think that's sort of maybe reflects Huxley's concern that science and technology might advance. Number one, might advance fast enough that the public can't really keep up with it and just sort of throws their hands up and goes, well, whatever, it's fine. I have a car. I don't care. And that also it could get into the hands of some malicious actors who decide, wait a minute, if I just utilize this technology in a specific way, I can create a world the way that I want it to be. And it's no surprise to me that he chose Henry Ford as kind of a pinpoint for this. Ford was a capitalist. He was an industrialist. And you can easily imagine what capitalists and industrialists and billionaires would do if they could just get their hands on a whole bunch of cloned workers who don't need a whole lot of tending, who don't really care about material things. They just get up, do the thing they want to do, and go to bed. I could easily imagine that becoming a priceless resource for the sort of industrial class in a lot of ways. And so for Huxley to kind of picture this and tell us through the book, like this is not a good thing. You don't want this. This is bad. Is a really interesting critique, again, on how, as much as we love the advance of technology and as much as we generally promote the advance of technology, it's not always good. And there are ways in which technological progress can lead to truly terrible things. It is interesting that he wrote this prior to, the development of the atomic bomb. I'm wondering if he had written this after that, if that might have been maybe more included, or if that might have had an effect on him, because the atomic bomb is really a good kind of touchstone for technology that we probably shouldn't have been tinkering with. I think that's an important point that Huxley's making about the advancement of technology and the advancement of how it can be used to change the world. But the other thing is the idea of order. Mustafa Mond at the end of the book says that the priority is order, social order, and social sort of stability. And what are we willing to do? What lengths are we willing to go to preserve stability in our society is a very, very big question. He was looking at Europe in the early 30s, kind of getting real unstable. A large part of it having to do with the effects of the First World War. A lot of it having to do with the Great Depression. And some of the ways in which people reacted to that would be to turn to fascism, in Italy and Spain and Germany. And people who are looking for order are going to make maybe some poor choices, because a German living in Germany might have said, well, yes, that guy with the little mustache, he's kind of weird, but you know what? My life is I'm no longer worried about my life. I've heard that some people are having a bad time, but that's not my problem. And you hear from people commenting about fascism in Italy, they say, oh, well, at least Mussolini made the trains run on time, which I don't think he actually did. But nevertheless, that kind of phrase, they make the trains run on time, is that prioritization of order over all else. And so Huxley kind of, again, took that concept that we want order in our lives and said, okay, let's take this as far as we can go, and created a world where there is order, maybe isn't the right word, but certainly stability, right? You don't get wars, you don't get riots, you don't get protests, you don't get any of that stuff because everyone's generally happy with how things are because they've been programmed to be. And we can, reading that today in 2024, we can definitely kind of see why this might be appealing to some people. Right now, sort of as I'm recording this, is the middle of the current, it's so hard to choose the right word, but let's call it genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. And there are protests popping up all over the world. There was a protest in Tokyo the other day. I mean, Japan doesn't have a whole lot to do with Gaza, but there was a protest in Tokyo. There are protests everywhere, protests at Eurovision. And a lot of people are protesting what Israel has done and the allies of Israel are doing. And it's met with, in many cases, not all cases, but especially we've heard on some of these college campuses, it's met with force. You have the police coming in, cracking down on student protesters who are occupying campus buildings and campus land. Why are they doing that? Because they want stability and they want order. All of these messy students screaming things and asking the universities to change their policies, divest in Israel, all that, that is disorder, and that is a problem that we don't like. Broken windows, smelly kids in tents, occupying the president's office, all that stuff. That is disorder. We don't like that. Send in the cops. And that is the extent to which we are willing to go. Well, not me, not you, certainly, but we as a society are kind of willing to go. At the moment, even though there are people objecting to these police incursions, it is still sort of the go-to way of dealing with a situation like this. So, yeah, we want order. We want stability. What are we willing to give up for it? What if the people who are upset about these protests, what if they got everything they wanted? What if they got all the students just shut up and went home? What if they got all of these protests just shut down? Well, they would get their lives in order. Their lives would be stable and their lives would be happy. Other lives would be miserable and terrible. Other lives would be lost. Other lives would be in great pain. But when you I think when you say, I just want order and I just want stability, for a large part, that's just about you. Because we, unlike the residents of Huxley's world, we can't enforce it globally. But if we could, we would. I'm pretty sure if we could, we would. And the price of that would be removing a large part of our humanity. The price of stability would be losing who we are as people. Because as people, we want things. We are upset about things. We're angry about things. We want to protest. We want people to change for the better. And if we remove that, then yes, we can have social order, but we're not really people anymore, are we? Not in that sense. The last part of this dystopia that I kind of want to touch on is a concept that is actually from Henry Ford, which is the idea that history is bunk. Again, this comes up in Mustafa Aman's speech at the end. But history is not taught in this world. People shy away from the idea of history because what's the point? What does it have to do with us now? And I think that is something that, again, in the 30s, maybe Huxley would have been concerned that people are not looking at the lessons of history. People are not looking at sort of what we need to know about the world that came before us in order to understand why the world is the way it is. And so this mirrors, to me, in a sense, it is a sort of softer version of Orwell's, he who controls the present controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future. The world government controls the past, but by telling everybody the past isn't important. And so by telling people the past isn't important, don't worry about it, now people don't have anything to compare themselves to. They don't have anything to say, well, is my life better now than it might have been 100 or 200 or 300 years ago? Because nobody cares. It doesn't matter. But I think that Huxley leaning on that several times throughout the text, these people's aversion to history and what they might have learned from history is really interesting. Because again, that is something that we should be paying attention to as modern people, that history is really important. And we need to understand where we came from in order to understand why we are here. And at least in my country, in the U.S., there are folks who do have an aversion to that. They don't really want certain areas or aspects of history to be available to everyone because it maybe make us look bad. Might make the country look bad. And again, we've been taught from childhood that our country is the best country in all the world. Of course, it's the best country in all the world. But once we start learning from history that maybe we've done some less than ideal stuff. How's that going to make us feel? That makes us feel bad. And we don't want to feel bad. The people in Huxley's Brave New World don't want to feel bad. And so they've decided not to feel bad by just not caring. And again, that's not going to help us. That's not going to help us in our world. So I think Huxley has put together a fine package of little kind of concerns and warnings and raised eyebrows in this book. And he wants us to examine sort of what's important to us and what our values are, and why maybe the world that we're in, as kind of disordered and chaotic and strange and sometimes unpleasant as it may be, is really, it's a good world to be in. Because if we made our world perfect, it would be terrible. If we made our world perfect, we would not be human beings anymore. We wouldn't be the people that we are. We would be shells. We would be animals. And if we want to keep our humanity, then the bargain is that we have to have some sort of suffering. That's the deal. So that, I think, with this book as a bit of social criticism is really good. I'm sure there are people who have written much better stuff on this than I have. Again, I'm pretty sure you could make a whole academic career out of Aldous Huxley, and probably largely out of this book. If you have thoughts about sort of the way that Huxley was observing society and the comments that Huxley was having about society, leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions as well. In the meantime, I think next, I want to talk a little bit. The next video will probably be a little shorter, but I want to talk a bit about style and structure, because Huxley's doing some really interesting things in this book, stylistically speaking, that I think are worth examining. And honestly, that I'm not even sure what to make of. So we shall see. In the meantime, thank you for sticking around. As always, I greatly appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.